Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, where we code a complete game live on stream. We would like to further debug and test our work from yesterday today, and that's going to be good because as we get everything that we worked on for the past couple weekends up and running for real. It will mean that we can work with our art assets now in a lot of ways that we couldn't really work with them before. It will open up the ability for us to put a lot more art into the game than we have been able to in the past. And that's really fun because it allows us to, just dress up the world in a lot of ways that makes it feel nicer. I mean, at the end of the day, the thing that makes a video game and not a board game is that you've got all this audio-visual stuff that, reacts to you and is instantaneous and stuff, and feels, very immersive. And so, the art and the sound and the music and all of those things coming together is not just set dressing. People like to harp on gameplay and say that gameplay is always the thing you really have to care about. And, it's not wrong, meaning, gameplay is very important because that's what gives the game its longevity. It's what it allows a game to really be more than just something you do for 10 minutes. But without that solid presentation and feel, a game really isn't, it's nothing really, right? Because that's why you're playing a video game instead of something else, is you want that continuous audio-visual feedback that's part of the immersion, part of the game. And so it's always really rewarding when you get to spend time integrating assets that you have into the game, because it's what makes it start turning into a real immersive experience, as opposed to just like a tech demo or a prototype, that just kind of feels sparse and bare bones. So, it's usually a pretty rewarding thing to do, so I think we'll have a lot of fun doing it. And yeah, instead of just talking about it, let's get started here. So I'm gonna open up Handmade Hero on the pre-stream. I think it was who was it? Said it? Frosty Ninja. Frosty Ninja brought up the fact that we didn't quite finish typing in the stuff we should have typed in yesterday, and that makes sense. We ended the stream kind of right in the middle when we had literally just finished up, and we hadn't really gotten a chance to validate anything other than just going, "Yep, it sort of seems to work." What we need to do, he pointed out, is I added this flag consumed semicolon to make sure that the system would know not to try to eat a semicolon a second time, right? But we never actually set it. So here, where we do consume semicolon, where we actually eat that semicolon, we want to say that we did consume the semicolon, right? So here's an idea, a different idea too. We could do, instead of setting consume semicolon, one thing I was thinking is we could make a thing called semicolon, which is something like this. And what I could do is make it so that instead of setting consume semicolon, you just consume the semicolon into the semicolon token, right? Like so. And then here, instead of checking that and using a new one, it could say, just look, if you haven't gotten a semicolon token, right? So if this hasn't actually happened, I don't know if we've got one for tokens yet, but I can certainly make one in the tokenizer. So you could see here, like, right, when we've got these different functions, I might just add one for, much like token equals. I'll do like is valid. And that's just something that will say, hey, does this token actually have any text in it? Something like this. I assume we've got one for buffers. I don't know if we do or not. Wow, we don't even have one for buffers? What the hey? What the hey? How's that possible? So basically just something that will check that. I'll probably add this for buffers because I would like this for buffers as well. That way we don't have to have a separate Boolean that's maybe a little bit easy to mess up, like I did, where we just don't set it or something. If we just remember, look, if you're going to consume the semicolon, put it into semicolon, and that way, you know, it'll automatically trigger on the way out. That would be pretty good. So that was one thing. The other thing that was mentioned is checking the HTTT out, HT out multiple times. I don't actually remember where they were suggesting that is, because we have more than one. I guess I don't know where that is exactly. I'm not seeing that. Oh, here's one. Okay, so it's the second time we loop through. So on here, this is just checking this again for no reason. That's not really a bug, it's just stupid, right? Because if this was true, by the time we get here, it can't have become false because we literally don't do anything that has anything to do with HHT out being set or unset, right? So if it's set there, it's going to be set here because it's set to, it's valid or not for a whole pass through the code. It doesn't oscillate, right? So we don't need to check it per time, obviously. So I think that's the only two things there. So we kind of need to make sure as well that the loading of these alignment points actually works. I don't think we've checked that at all because we don't actually have to do any rebuilds here, like imports, you know what I mean? So loading something in from the drive and wiping out what we currently have set, we don't really have any way to do that currently. So we should add that and test that, as well as delete our files entirely and rebuild the HHTs and make sure that that also produces an HHT with all of the right alignment points set. So we kind of want to do both those things, I think. I'll start with the in-game editor part where we don't really have, at the moment, any way to do that cold reload. So let's take a look at that. In here, we've got two buttons. There's an import button that does synchronize asset file changes. And we've got a import and save button that does synchronize asset changes as well. It just does it through this call, which is something separate, meaning it first does a look at our undo list and stuff. So those two things. Looking at these here, the names are a little bit hard to describe. I think we want like something like import HHT changes and save to HHT, something like that. I don't really know how to describe it particularly well, but it's something like that. And in here, you know, when we test this is not supposed to be on is dirty anymore because pretty much you always want to do it. When we do save HHTs, again, we really want these available at all times because we'll never really know. Like before we did it, there was an is dirty thing. Revert makes sense because that doesn't actually touch the HHTs at all. So if we haven't made any changes, revert doesn't need to be active. But reload and save HHTs are things that we might want to do at any time because they happen to be things that if the HHT changed on disk, we may want to use or, you know, merge. Like, so we kind of want that ability to be available at all times. And again, it's a little squinky and we may like sort of decide at the end of the day that we want to make a cleaner idea of what loading and saving means because it's kind of a little bit confusing right now since we always process the HHT file whether we're loading or saving because one like does the reinsertion and one does the actual like importing of art assets, and they're sort of both happening at the same time now. So some stuff like that is a little bit hard, and you know, again, we could make those a lot more delineated, right? So we could have one that's like save these alignment points out to the HHT, and one that's like load the alignment points in from the HHT as separate things and import new bitmaps as another option, because when we're doing the parsing, we have the ability to just not do things. Like we could just say, look, if the user's not asking us to do this particular type of operation, don't do it now when we're, you know, when we're processing this HHT. So, you know, I don't know. So there's stuff like that, and I'm not sure exactly how we want to deal with it. But that's how it goes. Wait, so I thought I enabled both of these and changed that. Did I not? I probably didn't get a successful build here. I didn't. So let's take a look at what we're looking at here. Oh, right. So I need the isValids to be I need to actually write those for the buffers, and I need to actually post these. So this isValid here wants to come up as something that you can call on a token, just to find that everywhere. And then if I go over to where these buffers are defined, this right here, I probably want something in here as well. So if I go, oops. Actually want to create a new one there. So this is the types file, and I don't really know the most appropriate place to put those, but I thought we had like a helper or shared. Yeah. I assume the best place to put something like an isValid for a buffer would be in here, because this is where a lot of those kinds of questions get asked. But I guess I don't really know. I feel like this is probably the best place for it, because we don't really have a dedicated place for buffer operations. Maybe we should. We just at the moment don't. And so, again, that's something that, you know, I'm not going to think too hard about at the moment, but, you know, in the future we might do some cleanup where we decide to, you know, regularize some of these things a little bit more dramatically. All right, so I'm going to do an isValid call here on this buffer. That's just, you know, a check to see, is the buffer count greater than 0? If it is, it's got data in it. If it's not, then it doesn't. So that's a pretty easy way for us to determine whether or not it's valid. As far as the tokenizer is concerned, you know, I was thinking I was going to call this, I want that call regardless, but I think maybe there's actually a better way to do this. Because tokens store a type, it means that if you've got a token of 0 length, you could still technically, it could be valid, like end of stream. That's technically a valid token that has just nothing in it. So I think the better way to do this would probably be to say, look, that's what it would, you know, if token type is unknown, then it's invalid. But anything else, right, would be valid. That seems a little bit better to me, because it has that flavor of allowing this one extra case that really could happen sometimes. I doubt it would really come up in practice much, but, you know, it could. And I don't really want to, like, leave a little surprise for myself there that ruins our day sometime in the future. So anyway, let me go ahead and give this a shot here. If we look at the, if we look at the editor buttons now, you can see we've got reload and save here. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to hit reload HHT to just see what happens, right? Because I have no idea. If I click on that, does anything bad happen, right? And it doesn't look like it does at the moment, which is a good sign. And so, I don't know, you know, maybe we're okay, maybe we're not. We have some work to do, so we'd like to be able to see general errors in here a little bit better, so that's something we probably want to look at a little bit in the future as well. But let's now try a slightly more involved test, which is just to get rid of the data files altogether and see if they can be rebuilt properly. So I'm going to go ahead and build in release mode also for a little while till we actually want to step in and look at something, because that just makes things a lot easier on us since everything's faster. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm just going to delete basegame.hha, and I'm going to delete intro cutscene.hha, so that those are just gone. And then I'm going to go ahead and run the game, and I'm going to let it try to rebuild its art assets from scratch and see if it can do it, or if it just fails, right? And so we're going to try that, see how that does. And then what I think I'd like to do is go add a thing that just dumps all the errors from all the files that are currently being that we have on, like, I don't know how to say this. Dump all the errors that currently exist and see what happens. Okay, so you can see we do have a bug, right? It's not quite working yet because deleting the file and making it rebuild the alignment points, it didn't get the alignment point, right? There's no, it's not there, right? And so we don't really know where that error is coming from, right? We don't have a real way to look at that. Now, again, we have a lot more information than we're getting here, too, because, like, every one of these things has an error log on it, but we can't see error logs for things that aren't on the screen, right? Because we can't select them or anything, so that makes it pretty hard to use. And so, again, what I would like to do here is I'd like to have some way of showing all of the errors that happened in the file in some way that makes it clear what's going on, right? And so that, because for all we know, there's like some good error messages being produced by our parser that tell us exactly what's not working, and we're just never going to see them. So we would like some way of displaying that error information in a way that actually makes it easy to see. If we go backwards a little bit and say, let's take a look at, for example, the asset system, where are those things getting stored? What you can see here is inside asset source file, there's actually a stream for errors that's written here. And, you know, that stream is a self-contained error stream that just gets dumped to and grows. So I feel like if we wanted to, we could just go through here and show these errors directly. And we would be able to just list those for all the source files that we've got pretty much at all times. I think that would work. The only thing that I don't necessarily know is, are we actually properly tracking that using the error stuff that we've got? So let's first make sure that the errors are actually getting attached to those source files in some way, and then we'll move on from there. So if you take a look here, we don't actually open up the tokenizer when we first do synchronize. What we actually do is we wait till we get to parse HHT, and then we open up the tokenizer, right? And if we look at what we're doing with the tokenizer here, you can kind of see that the error context, I think, is never actually getting set. So if we actually go to the tokenizer in here, you can see there is an error stream. It's never actually getting used. So if we come back and look, you can see that there's really no error stream even being mentioned, right? So into the asset errors, we do pack all of the errors that we got for that file into the asset that we're actually exporting at any given time, but we're not actually doing anything with the error stream in terms of saving it in memory like we said we were going to do, right? And so we really need some way of doing that sort of a thing. Like, we need some way of putting those errors into. We need something here that will allow us to take those errors and make them work, make them be tracked across the tokenizer and into something we can display. So I'm not sure how we want to do that. There's many ways we could do that. I also am not sure about storing the errors into the file like we're doing now, whether we actually care about doing that or not. It seems like maybe that doesn't actually need to happen, and we probably don't really need to worry too much about doing that. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we should be doing that. I'm not sure. But I think a more interesting way to do this would just be to say, look, when you do an import, we'll just take that error stream, and now we can just show the entire error stream as something that can be displayed on the you know, on like the readout of our what am I trying to say? The editor panel, I guess. We could just take the error stream. The last time you did an operation, it'll just show that error stream. That seems reasonable to me, right? And I don't know that we really need to do much else, right? So if, for example, I came in here and said, all right, let's suppose that the context has an error stream on it. So there's like, you know, something like this. And then in here we would just do like, all right, the error stream is going to be something. And we'll set it here, right? Then anytime we create one of these tokenizers, so when we call parse HHT like this, I'm just going to say, all right, from there, we'll just set the tokenizer's error stream to be, you know, the error stream that comes in from the context. That way, whenever we have an error, it'll now get piped in there. And that'll just hopefully let us, you know, do something more productive with those. So then, anytime we do this, I would say, well, that probably should just be like this, right? And these streams, you can see how these work. We've got the ability to discard stream, you know, total size, that sort of stuff. What I think I'd like to do is just allow these things to have like their own ability to grow, this error stream. And that's pretty easy to do because it's got a memory arena, right? And so I think I should be able to just create one of these streams with a memory arena and just clear the memory arena every time I'm about to do something. So for example, in this case, what I could do is say, every time we go to do one of these things, right, we're going to reset it. So the assets error stream is just going to be an on-demand memory stream of assets like error stream memory, like so. And the way that that's going to work is the assets error stream memory is going to just get cleared. So we'll start off, right? Excuse me. We'll start off with error stream memory clear, and then we'll put everything into it, and then the next time we do a synchronize, we'll clear it again. That way we always have an error stream that's available for us to display. If you never use it, it won't take up any memory, so it shouldn't be a problem, and off you would go. The asset source file currently keeps these per file. I don't know that we really want that for any purpose, so I may just pull that feature out entirely. It just doesn't seem particularly useful. So here is our error stream memory, and here is our error stream. And I think that's all we would really need to do, assuming these are cleared to 0 at the outset, which I believe we do. But don't quote me on that. Although I guess this memory is allocated from the 0 clear pool, so it probably would be fine. So yeah, let me take a look here. Yeah, so I think this would be fine. And we would end up with a nice clear stream at the start. And then anytime you do an export of any kind or an import, you would get errors piped to that stream. Now, if I go into the editor, we already have a thing that displays the errors from like individual files. I don't really remember where we did that, but we did have it. Isn't there another file besides in-game editor? Maybe there isn't. Anyway, in update and render editor, we should be able to track this down. So it's the asset editor that was doing it. In the asset editor, blah, 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 blah. Here we go. So we've got this annotation label here that says errors. And that's kind of crappy. Like, that label F, I don't think would even do line feeds properly, so we're probably going to have to do a little bit of work here to actually make this thing work. But that's okay. So if we were to actually do this thing here a little bit more coherently, we're going to need some way of like dumping a stream out, right? But that's okay, right? Again, not that hard. So let's go ahead and make that happen. So instead of like annotation label there, I don't know where are we right now in this file. So in-game editor actually has all of that just built in. All right. So when we do like annotation label, we need something where we can actually display the whole stream in there. So when we call asset editor, I think probably right here for the HHA bit, that's probably where we would put it. So like right here, we would want to look through that stream. So, you know, we've got assets error stream. And this is the thing that we're going to actually want to loop over. If I look at what a stream looks like, you can see that it's just a series of chunks, right? And so if I just loop over the chunks, I should be able to print them in order. So here's a chunk. I'll start with the first one. And go through them. And then each chunk has a file name, line number, and a set of contents there. The file name and line number in this particular case, I don't know if the file name and line number that are being recorded to the stream chunk are ones that reflect where the error came from, or whether they're ones that reflect the actual source of the error. If you look at the tokenizer, we should be able to determine that. So it looks like, yeah, the file name and line, we actually just print out the whole thing. So in here, we can just kind of go and print, right? All right, so, you know, there's a bunch of different ways we could do this. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the annotation label F thing. So this is how we were printing that stuff out, and you can see that it basically just does the formatting and then calls label. So if we actually look at what label does, you can see it calls basic text element, which does its own thing in terms of producing a text element. I don't think this ever wraps lines or anything like that. You can see it just doing text out at. And so, yeah, like, and it's got like the interaction stuff kind of along with it and all that nonsense. So if we wanted to make this work for what we're doing, we kind of need to do something a little bit more direct. We probably want to do something here, right, where we're calling text out at for, you know, things a little bit more specifically. And, you know, passing some strings. I'm not crazy about how that's working. You know, if you look, it's using char stars here, which I don't love. Especially because I'm assuming that TextOp doesn't actually need that. Like, you know, right here, this for loop could have been over a number. So I don't know. Like, I'm not thrilled with that, and that would make it harder for us to print these things out. So I kind of feel like this wants to be upgraded a little bit to take a length instead of a char star, right? So in here where we do TextOp, I think I'm just going to go ahead and say, let's make that happen. I'm going to if zero this out temporarily while I make that work. I'm going to go ahead and hit build there. All right, so let's take a look at the errors we have. Context error stream is wrong. Error stream memory, that should be an ampersand. Oops. And what else? What was it complaining about? I see what it's complaining about. This also needs to be an ampersand. Okay. So that compiled just fine, and what I need to do now is just make that change so that it's possible for us to pass strings to this thing anytime we want to. And so if I just do that compile, the compiler will guide me along there, I think. And if you look at the way this code works, unfortunately, yeah, it's another one of these kind of like crappy parser things that we just, I don't know why we did this. I think someone just wanted to know what would happen if we wanted to put stuff in here for syntax coloring, which I think we've literally never really used, like ever. But that's okay. You know, like I said, not that hard to really to fix that. So if we wanted to fix that, what you can see here is we've got sort of an at pointer, and we want to be able to treat it like a regular parse. I can do the same trick I did before. If you want to sort of change pseudo parsing code like this in place, you can just change the places where you're looking at those values to refer to temporaries, and those temporaries can do the check to make sure they don't read off the end of the buffer, and then you're pretty much done, right? It's not the most elegant way to do it. It's kind of it's inefficient potentially. It's hard to say though without timing it whether it really is all that inefficient in any particular case, but you know, you could imagine doing a better job certainly. But it is very simple, right? It takes code that was written as if there was a null terminator and turns it into code that doesn't need the null terminator without really introducing a whole lot of variance, so it's easier to get it working and debugged more quickly. So it's kind of a nice trick. But yeah, you know, is it the best thing ever? No. So if I go ahead and take the string here and loop over it this way instead, then what I can do is, like I said, here we can be a little bit more specific about what's going on. You can see the way that this is getting processed here is at always gets updated at particular points in the code. So in actuality, we don't do that. We actually do this, right? And that's fine. So, you know, no biggie. And so these pieces of code all know how far they would like to move the read cursor along for their like pseudo parsing, right? I don't know what. Oh, this is. So I guess the other day I said, you know, someone was asking about UTF-8, and I said we didn't support arbitrary glyphs. I guess we do, technically. We don't really read UTF-8, but we do read inline glyph numbering. So, yeah, I forgot we had that. But I remember, yeah, that was because we put in like the glyph for owl or something as a test to make sure that we were supporting, you know, Unicode code points right. And it worked. So that was cool. Anyway, ignoring that for a moment, let's keep going. So yeah, all I want to do now is make it easier for this code to parse. And so I kind of want like all of these things to be there and accessible. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is, again, just initialize the amount of look ahead that I need to zeros. And then I'm just going to do, you know, something that looks like this. If, you know, I guess what I would say is probably the easiest is to say, look, if add index plus some number is less than string count, then we can read it, right? So if add index plus 1 is less than string count, then I can read at 1, right? I know I can always read at 0, and it's just going to be this, right? But if I want to read these other ones, which would look something like this, if I want to read each of those, I have to look and see, you know, as I go, which one of these are actually valid, and this is what would tell me, right? So if I said this, add index plus 1, if that's less than string count, then I can read the plus 1 value. That is all I would need for reading all of these, right? So as long as each of those indexes remains in range, I can read from it. Otherwise, I set it to 0. And then the rest of this code, like I said, it's, again, not the, you know, there's better ways of writing the code than what I did. But that's the way that does the most straightforward transformation on a parser that was trying to, that was counting on being able to read off, you know, as far as it could without hitting an alternator and stuff like that, and turn it into something that doesn't require the null terminator anymore. It's just a simple way to make that happen. This should be that, and this should be that. Anytime we had a text stop here from something that was a char star string, that should really do a string length string like this, or oh sorry, we already have a way to do this. It's just a wrap z, so that will create the string length and go. And then we can now say, or when you're doing text out at, you could just pass a regular string here, and it'll thunk through with the same default parameter stuff to the text stop, right? And so that's a lot nicer there. Let's take a look here. We've got, for get text size, we're doing the sizing call. Again, that needs to just do a wrap z on the string here. And the same thing would be true here. Although, wait. Shouldn't that have just... Oh no, never mind. Let's see what else we've got. Looks like that was it, actually. And so now we just need to debug it. Did we break it? And so on, right? So it looks like that's working fine. The debug system appears to have remained intact. No issues there that I can see. All right, good deal. And so now that I can do that, it makes it easy for me to use the printing, you know, use what we've got to print out sections of this stream. And that's really all I wanted. So, you know, in here now we can take those individual chunks and print them out as separate pieces. I'm going to do nothing particularly fancy at first. I'm just going to do, in fact, I can even do this as a label if I want to, essentially. So for text out at where we're doing, yeah, in fact, here. If I was to do something really weird and stupid, I could actually do it this way. Right? And so if I go over to how we're doing labels, you can see they take a char star. Sometimes what I'd rather, again, I'd rather change these now to sort of doing things with a, you know, with strings, because like I said, I just, we didn't do that at Handmade Hero because I was trying to keep things simpler. But really, I just hate it. And anytime I ever try to write anything with null terminators, I always get sad. And so, you know, I should have just said, all right, we're not doing null terminators. Sorry, everyone, and gone with length strings at the outset. But you know, I just didn't. So in terms of basic text element here, I'll just do string text. So when we go forwards with that, it should work. We'll have to make sure the get text size call supports it, but otherwise we're good. And then through here, right, I can just change it like so. This always just works with strings because we always have the strings. So it should be pretty straightforward, right? Like so. And yep. So like, for example, here, you know, we got this temp and we're doing this label F, we're printing it in. Again, really easy to make that work. You know, we can have temp string and we just do temp string count equals this, temp string data equals the temp buffer, and then you're done, right? So you don't even have to look for the size because you get it back from format string list, and off you go. Looking here, basic text elements. This again should just be taking a string there. Again, button F, same deal. That's just going to do a temp string. And you're done. Same thing here. And here. So again, just kind of propagating that change through. Looks like we got a couple other ones. That get text size, I should also just make one for that. So get text size, right, you can call it a couple different ways. But yeah, that's the Rhapsody version. So you just need a version without that. And again, I really probably just don't even want those the null terminated versions. Eventually, I would just get rid of those entirely. But since, you know, I don't want to go doing large changes right now for no particular reason, I'm just going to change it in the editor and leave it that way. Let's see. That's that. This is this. And that all looks fine. So all I need to do here is just say, look, these are going to be 6. Do we have there it is, const z. I'm like, do we have a way of wrapping one of these things? I think we do, and we did. So yeah, const z is all we need to do to turn one of those into a proper string. I'm not sure what button is complaining about here. It's it's the void star classifier that's having a problem with. So that classifier that it needs there, it can't pass the string because the string is not a pointer, obviously, right? But it can pass the data of the string just fine. So for classifiers, that's totally easy as well. And there we go. So I think that's all good. This again is the temp, temp, and temp. That's all fine. All of these are just const z's now. You just have to, I'm sorry. Well, I guess they're Rhapsody currently. See what we've got here. So you can't actually pass this because C is stupid. So this would be a wrap Z, sort of. I mean, you could put it outside and not do it that way. But yeah, so I don't know exactly how we would want to do that wrapping. Probably actually want to have a separate builder. So, you know, basically this. Something where we can say that. So that we can actually pass the count directly. So, you know, I would often call this like bundle string or something. And then you define some macro that's like, well, if you know what you're going to be putting in here, you can just say, you can just pass these two things to it like that. Right? So you still can avoid doing work. You can make these things be packed correctly. And so again, it's just annoying because since C is so crappy and C++, what you would want to do is have something where you could just say that your strings are always these kind of strings. I feel like they were gonna add that to C++ 2020 or whatever. I'm sure they screwed it up and it's terrible, because they always do. But they were gonna have, you know, strings where you could finally say, you know, here's what I mean when I say a string. Revolutionary idea, I know, but I don't know if they ever got around to it. I'm sure it's real great if they did, but you know, you can imagine in a sane language, you would just say, look, here's what a string evaluates to. It's not null terminated anymore. It's going to be the data with a count in front of it as this layout, you know? And then that's what we're talking about from now on. That would be how a sane language would work, right? Because why would a programmer want you to predefine what a string looks like? It doesn't make any sense, right? But that's, you know, how people still think for some reason. So anyway, moving on. Let me just finish this port here. And one more. Actually, two more. Should probably have a utility function for this. You can see how many times you have to do this little shuffle. It's just it's a little bit hard to do the. There's not a lot of logic to it, so it's not that easy in C to write the thing that actually does what you want here. Any more brief than that, sadly? All right. So let's see what else we got. Bundle string cannot convert from U8 to char star. That's fine. There we go. And what is the problem? I was a little overzealous there. I admit that. Oops. Edible PX. Did we not make this take a string? We did not. I did not. So label text is there. This is a bundle. There we go. Again, just busy work at this point, doing the conversion. There's really nothing to it. All right. Just a few more here to go. So these guys, again, are just, these are just, everyone's taking a string, properly sized string there. And like I said, because it's stupid, you can't just define your language when you start to tell you that you wanted a length string and not a null terminated string. Null terminated strings being pretty much the worst way to store strings. But they're not only the default in C, they're actually the only way. So you have to insert your own code to deal with it, which is not fabulous. And like I said, I don't actually know if they ever really did fix that. I thought they were gonna at some point. I seem to recall seeing something. But don't quote me on that. All right. And so if we took a look over at format string, you can also see like the way that it works. We could have made, we definitely could make one that returns a string. And maybe that's something we should do going forward. Because that's just, now that we're sort of, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound on that, I'll probably want to just go the whole way and make sure that the whole thing works that way in the future. But we'll see. So these are, what's the problem? Editable PXY. Still taking this. Let's fix that. And keep going. Editable type. Editable type looks like it takes strings. What's the problem? Label text. So this just wants to be like not a string, right? But that's fine. And the label is calling get name on a debug state and temp name. So get name returns a char star, which is fine. But we can just wrap that, right? You can see pretty much in all these cases, it would know what it is. I'll make it not do that at the moment. Well, maybe I'll just have it wrap it on the outside. Like, really, that thing should just return a string, but I probably won't do that. And so if we want to bundle this one, then we can do that in place as well. What else we got here? These are just for our profile and stuff like that. Again, these are just directly bundleable. So it's like other profiler stuff. fine. All right, and I think we're done. That was more than I wanted to do, but just make sure everything's kind of working. So at the moment, we have to go back and check now to make sure we didn't break everything. Converting everything to strings, because we may well have. At least all that stuff is working okay. We can look at the profiler. Seems like that's working okay. So it's a pretty straightforward change, but we could have slipped up somewhere, certainly. So let's go ahead and now put in display the chunk contents. So if I look at the label call, it just needs a layout and then a string. I think that is all we really need there. And now we should be able to see those errors each time as we go. So when we run the code now, we should be able to see all of the errors. And, here they are. So we know that we've got a bunch of crap happening that's bad, and we should start by eliminating those. And this is exactly why I wanted to do this. So you can see our parser's hopefully pretty good here, where it tells us like exactly where we need to look. It's a real, parser with actual information in it. This printout's not particularly good. It's not even scrollable, and it doesn't really assemble strings properly. So we probably want to do a little work on that too eventually, but at the moment, this gives us what we want, so it's totally fine. If we were going to be the types of people who do things unnecessarily, we could also be funny about this. Since we did the work, I'm going to demand that we actually use it and say that because we did like the color stuff, we should actually put something in there. Like just to see if this works. Because I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. So like, we've got syntax coloring for no reason. So anyway, 3517 in base game. Let's load it up and see what we're screwing up. So in basegame.hht, what was it, 30, I can't remember, 37? What did it say? I read it and then I forgot what it said. 3517. So this comma is bad? Is that right? So it's F3, I gotta remember which one. I wonder, so is this wrong? Did we screw up the line number? Because there isn't one of those on that line, on base game 35. Right? So I think we're gonna have to do some debugging there, right? Because this is line 35. And it looks like it's complaining about something else. Unless, I guess we could be off. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I mean, you would think it's probably complaining about this line because this is the line that's being parsed weirdly, right? This is the new thing that we added. And so if you look at what's going on there, this is 35. It really means this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not exactly the size of the comment, so I'm not sure who's getting that wrong. So let's take a look at our tokenizer because we want to debug this part of it. like I said, we'd like it to be accurate because it just speeds up our ability to find the errors. When we do the tokens, we just set them to be whatever the tokenizer thinks at the moment that thing should be. So in here, when we do get token raw, it looks like anytime we see an is end of line, we do a plus plus tokenizer line number. So I'm not sure why we would be having a problem with that, because it seems like that should be pretty accurate. But do we actually track it inside the comment? We don't. So that looks like the primary problem. We just aren't tracking line numbers through compound comments. So in here, we would have to do this. We would have to do this every time when we look and see if we've got an is end of line situation presenting itself. So, you know, something like this would actually have to occur every time. So we would need here to say something like, look, if tokenizer at 0 if we have either of those new line conditions occurring, we need to go an extra one so we don't overcount the line number, right? And then we need to actually advance. What I could do too there is do it like this. So that would allow me to do, like, look, anytime we see one of these things, we'll skip it if it's a double. We'll skip one ahead, and then we'll just check anytime we see an end-of-line character, we'll make sure we track that as a line number increment. So that may have been our only bug, because we were pretty accurate otherwise. Just looks like we were skipping the comment, and hey, lo and behold, that's exactly what we were doing. So looking in here, you can see it changed now to 41. Let's see if that's any more accurate and correct. All right, so now our line number tracking is accurate. You can see that it's upset about this curly brace. So it says it's unexpected, which means it was trying to get something else in its place, and we should try and figure out what that thing is. Also, now that I think about it, when you look at this error message, it says unexpected token type. Is that actually the best error message that we could be giving there? Because if that's actually coming from require token, instead of saying unexpected token type, what we probably should say is, you know, unexpected token type, you know, expected something else, right? Like whatever it is that we actually expected. Now, the tough part about that is that token type, I don't know that we have any way of actually outputting what the token type is. So, like, if you look, we don't have a string for any of these token types. But I'm willing to go the extra mile there and say, look, let's actually put that in here. So let's do a table in the way that C++ makes you do, because it's horrible and should be doing automatically. If we said get token name and I'll say type name, and we said token type, pass me the type, and then, you know, we'll just do a switch statement on the type and have a case for each of these that returns a string. So that's what we would do in this case. And I'm going to go ahead and do it. So we got open paren, close paren, colon, semicolon, asterisk, open bracket, oops, close bracket, open brace, close brace, and equals, comma, or pound, string, identifier, number, spacing, oops, spacing, and end of line. Comment, end of string. Oops. So now I just need to give those things some names. And a lot of them are pretty simple, right? It's weird, like open parentheses and close parentheses for something that we have to say so often is such a horrible phrase. I guess we should just rename them to paren, period. Like, there is no word parentheses anymore. We will never use it again. So now what I could do is actually make that require token print out something more useful. So when it says unexpected token type, it can say, like, I actually expected this other thing, right? And so that's pretty handy because now when we look at those error messages, it'll give us a little bit more information about what we actually want. So you can see here now we got this, but it was expecting to see the actual number there. And so if we go into the code where that's actually happening, we should be able to see that we got our tokens stuff wrong. And off we go. So you can see it's pretty obvious, right? We had an equals, and we just never had those enclosures. So what I would say is we aren't using enclosure anywhere else, so I think maybe that's actually just because this is wrong, and it should just be that. So I think maybe our parser is actually correct. And really what we should be doing is none of that. So that may just be a case of our parser being right and our output being wrong. And that's what it actually should look like, right? So I deleted that here. And so now if I recompile, let's see what we get for error messages now. So now it's actually running the import, it looks like. So that must have been the errors that were stopping us from really taking the time to import more stuff. We were probably just importing just down to there and stopping. And this is great. So it looks like it worked exactly right. Because now we've actually got those reloaded, and they're correct. So that certainly seems like now we can rely on those HHTs to be reasonable and actually have the data we expect. So the next question is, we did look and see, there's our stuff that we've produced. Looking at, I'm going to close this. Looking at the sizes they look about right now, you can see it doesn't update the size till after the file handles get closed. The only thing I'm wondering about is, let's take a look at what happens when we rewrite those HHTs again. So here's our tags, and I'm going to go ahead and copy basegame.hht to basegame.backup and overwrite it. And what I'm going to do now is force it to re-save that file. So I'm going to go ahead and say save HHTs here, and then close it. And what I want to see is, did it change the file at all, right? Did anything happen? So I'm going to load meld, and I'm going to ask it to do that diff just to see what it comes up with. So if I go into Handmade and I put inside the tags directory, I say, here's the old one, here's the new one, give me the comparison, and see what it finds. There's nothing. That's what I hope for. So now let's go in and try something a little more audacious here. So if I was to select one of these guys and say, all right, here's, let's edit the tags on this thing. So here's the default base on this guy. Where is it though? I don't actually see this. Why don't I see it? That's a little weird, right? So we've got some kind of a bug there, even though this looks correct. Like, it's a default alignment point, and the sprite is there. There it is. For whatever reason, no matter what I do, I don't actually see... Oh, just because the head was just too large to see? Weird. All right, so anyway, let's see what we can do here. So if I go ahead and start by trying to edit these guys a little bit down, I'm going to add the base of neck point. I think that's how these guys snap together. It's top of head snaps. No, it's just default, I guess. And this goes to the parent, right? So anyway, yeah, the alignment point on this dude and the alignment point on this dude are supposed to line up. So if I set the base of neck, it's that green point, it would go like something like right there, right? And then if I set the default point on this, it would go something like right there. And so I think everything's fine. Right, and then the fact that that syncs into the ground is something that we're going to have to now look at, because we want to actually make our sprites have the correct z-bias to prevent that from happening, right? But it does look like that's pretty straightforward. I think we need a better way. I think we need to be able to turn off temporarily some of this stuff, because it's hard to see when everything's stacked on top of each other. We would like to be able to look at the points in isolation a little bit better. So I think we want something that says, don't draw, when I turn this off, don't draw the things that are attached to it. And I suppose there's an easy way to do that. I can just set it to default, right? And so then as I set this, I can set my ground point, which is somewhere like there, and then I can set my attachment point, which is somewhere like there, and then I can turn this back. But that's a little bit of a janky way to do that, so I don't know. We'll see. So anyway, if I was to set all of these so that the hero would be proper now, what would we get? Oh, and you know what? That's the wrong direction too. That's So if I push the right direction, I'm getting this. And if I push the left direction, I'm getting that. So the head looks like it's also incorrectly coming in there. So the fist is correctly updating the direction, and I think the body is too, but the head isn't. Do we have a bug in our head import code, or is that just wrong in the file? Let me take a look. So here's the sources directory for base game. Here's everything that comes into the base game, the art files here. And so if we look at these, we've got the head hero is what we're looking for. I'm going to load that up. So here is the hero head. So it's just wrong. So the file's wrong, not us, looks like. And so if I go in here and look at that, what you can see is that if I were to open a different head file, so if I were to go load like head orphan 01, for example, you can see it's supposed to be right, up, left, down. So this is actually just backwards, so we just need that art file to be fixed. I'll make a note of that so we can get updated art files, which we're going to want to do at some point here anyway. Let me go ahead and just put that in here. And we can deal with that later. Okay. So that's good. That's not our fault. So we don't really have to belabor that any longer. That'll just be an art file update that will fix it. And so the rest of the stuff we should be able to do now too if we wanted to. So for example, well, you know what? Let's not push our luck. I'm going to hit save HHTs. And now I'm going to see whether or not that actually worked. So if I go over to meld and I refresh it, I should have gotten some updates. Although it doesn't look like I did. All right, so we are still screwed up a little bit here. Am I wrong? Meaning we did not see these files change, and these files should have changed. So we're going to have to step through that code path and see why we're not updating the alignment points there in that case, I guess, is what should have happened. Did we even rewrite the file? Or maybe those buttons don't work. So we didn't even rewrite the file. So it looks like those buttons aren't quite hooked up the way I would expect. So let's take a look. So when you hit save all changes, which I think is what would happen there. Yeah. So when you hit save all changes, it should call synchronize asset file changes, which, when passed true, would do save changes to HHT. So that should happen. I would also like, let's also make this be a little bit more explicit here. Like some kind of positive confirmation that we saved the thing out. We basically need some way of getting like a time or something. So I don't really have any good way to mark this, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, I want to be able to do something like this. So that we can actually know that we wrote something. the time. And then we say later something else, right? So yeah, not quite what I would have hoped for. I really don't know what to put in there. I guess for now, I could do something stupid like this. And maybe in here, we could have, you know, some kind of thing that we temporarily... I don't know. I'm just making this up. And that way, every time we save, it will give us positive confirmation that we actually did save. You know what I mean? That seems like a good idea. So in here, when we do save changes to HHTs, maybe I can, you know, and you know what I could do too is like this. So right now, this is just a really crude way of me making sure that I know when I click that button that it actually did what I think it did, so that we can start debugging it. So yeah, when I come through here, and, you know, it told me it loaded, there's no errors, which is good. I do save, it did save, right? And so I want to know now why I'm not getting any meld diffs there. Let me actually... reload that. Don't know why I got rid of that. It would be nice if it remembered what my previous ones were. It doesn't have a recent menu, does it? There we go. So I'd like to know what's going on with this, and why it's not resaving those things. If I go through here to, you know, one of these things for the alignment points, let me just go ahead and do sort of similar operation to what I did before, right? I'll just moving this around like that or something. So now I want that to save. I hit save, and it's not saving. Oh, wait. That's not true. We just don't increment that number. So there we go. So yeah, for some reason that's not doing anything, and we want to step through there and now find out why we're not getting those updates that we had gotten before. So something weird is happening where it's not actually updating the alignment points the way that we would expect. Now, in the code where that's happening, it is a bit subtle, right? Because the way this works is it's actually doing a diff like this to see if the memory is equal or not between what we read in and, you know, yeah, well, what we read in and what we need to output. Interestingly enough, looking at the way this code works, it does. We're not actually outputting the point here, which we should. This should be causing a different bug than it is, I guess is one way to say it. It should be deleting the alignment point and not replacing it with anything. But that's not what we're actually seeing. So that's kind of weird. I do want to actually fix this bug as well, but this is not going to actually affect us at the moment because we have a different bug than this, right? But what I want is this code to be reusable. So if in here you say this, I suppose, and then you give it an alignment point, it'll output the alignment point. That way, I can just recall that in here and add the one thing that was missing, which is after you do the ignore, I want to output the alignment point afresh, right? That should have been what it was saying before. And off you go. So when we read one of these things in, like this, we want to test to see whether or not we should write it out or not. The only thing that I'm not sure how we want to do here is when we read this thing in, we also have one other thing to do, which is we need to test and see whether or not it should be deleted. So if we're writing the HHT, then we want to look to see whether this one is right or wrong. So it's basically a merge operation. We look to see if it's exactly the same, then we just use it exactly the way the user inputted it. If it's different, then what we want to do is say, look, is the point type actually that we have, like our point type, is that valid? And so, you know, this right here actually would be the thing we would want to look at, right? So if that's valid, if the memory is equal, we write it out. If it's not, what we want to do is say, all right, let's overwrite the one that we read with the one that we have. And then we would say, if that is an actual point, output it, otherwise don't. Like that, right? I think that's what we actually want to say. Again, shouldn't have been the bug we had, so something's still wrong, and I just don't know what. We're going to need to pass the grid X, grid Y, and point index here, but that's pretty easy to do for obvious reasons. Grid X, grid Y, point index, because in both places we know what that is. So yeah, really kind of weird because, you know, yes, there was a bug there. No, that bug is not the bug that was actually happening. The bug we're getting is nothing happens, right? So it's parsing these and deciding that it doesn't need to change them, or that it doesn't need to insert any. So for example, it's getting here, and it doesn't have any unprocessed, right? So it's like it never set this or something. Yeah. So I don't know. So we're going to have to debug that. Let me just run it one more time and get the current state now that I've changed the code of what the bug manifests itself as, and but then we got to fix that, right? And figure out what's going on there. So if I come through here and I should really change the way this works too. And tweak this, right? So, you know, I've set this to something totally different. Both of these are, you know, totally different now. And I asked to save it. It saves, and, you know, let's see what we got. So, not sure what to make of that. So, fixing that other problem appears to have actually changed it, which I don't know why it would have, because that wasn't really the bug that I was seeing. So I'm not sure what's going on there. It makes me a little bit nervous. I will also say, for some reason, we're getting extra white space in here. I think that's because we're not sort of eating up that white space. It's getting doubly copied in. So if we look at the code here that copies that out, what we should probably do is, when we do this output point here, we should probably say, look, since there was already going to be white space after the semicolon, if the user wanted it, we should not output white space ourselves. And so the only time we should actually output white space in either case, I suppose, is also, I guess, it should also be further over, yeah. That should be actually something that's controlled by insertion only. So in the places where we go to output these like this, here's where we would actually do that. Something like that, right? Okay, so let me close this. Let's save this. In here, I'm going to go ahead and resave the original. And so now we should be identical again. And I'm going to run the same test where I go in here and let's grab this dude and muss with this a little bit. And then I'm going to go here and hit save HHTs. Didn't get any errors. And so now if I come over here, we get files are identical, right? So again, bug is back. So what's going on there, right? Why is it that why did it work last time and not work this time, right? That's very confusing. And I'm not sure what's going on there. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Similarly, if I reload, it looks like it snapped back. So we can actually verify that it's not just some kind of weird other situation. It is actually not updating the HHTs with my changes. All right, so let's go in there and find out what's going on. I'm going to go do this in debug mode and step into that code. I wonder, can I just switch to debug mode directly? So if I do this, I've changed those values, right? If I now rebuild the code in debug mode, so I just say, look, the build is debug now. Thank you. Can I, and like the frame rate slows back down again. Did that not work? Oh. I had compile error there. So, what did I do wrong? Aha. Much better. All right. Sorry about that. I accidentally, one of the problems of using this interim build of 4coder that is it doesn't make it easy to know whether you've got errors. All right, so let's save the HHTs again and see what happens. There's my save HHT. Let's look in here. So that time it actually did work. I don't understand how we're getting that bug, though. That doesn't make any sense. How is it that it works sometimes and not other times? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. I'm still nervous we just have a bug. Like, why did that work? Let's try it fresh again, because I'm distrustful. I'm very distrustful now of that. So if I do reload... oh, cool, yeah, out of tag space. That makes perfect sense, too. That's a bug we'll have to fix. I'm distrustful now. I feel like that's kind of buggy. But, all right, whatever. So let's double check and see what's going on here. If I grab one of these now, and change it around. So yeah, it definitely didn't save it, right? Because that should have produced a difference. So it's almost like the first time you save it, it doesn't do anything, and the second time it does, or something weird like this, right? So now it's actually updated to be what I said. So it's kind of busted. We're not quite there yet, right? I thought we were sort of there, but we're not quite there because something weird is happening with the way that we're merging these. And to be fair, we're doing something fairly complicated here. Probably we shouldn't have done, but it was just an experiment to see if it would work. And it kind of does. So it's not like we're completely failing, but we're just not doing a very good job. So for some reason, we're not able to actually get a reliable change occurring there when we go through and process these HHTs and we're supposed to be saving them out. We're going through here and we're getting to the point where we should be triggering this memory is equal false case, so in here, and we should be calling this out point every time. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to happen. And I don't know why. Right? So this is the HHT, and you know, if I go ahead and overwrite the one that we've got, right? So now they're identical. I run it. I select one of these pieces here. I modify it somehow, right? I go back and I hit save. And that first time, it definitely doesn't save, right? I click it again. Nothing. So it seems like there's some kind of like uninitialized variable or just random thing going on, right? Because I didn't touch anything, but I saved the thing like a couple times, and then this time it works, right? So something super weird is going on there, and I have no idea what it is. And so we're gonna have to drill down and find out what's the magic there, like what's causing this to occasionally work properly and other times not, right? And we're printing out the errors, so we're also not getting any errors there as far as I can tell, meaning it's not like something sporadically failing, like rewriting the file or something, which would be a pretty reasonable thing to assume. So I don't know. What we probably should do is, but we're not, you know, it could be that this is erroring out, we just don't know. So that might be something to try as well, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more verbose stuff there and see what happens. I'm going to look at write modifications to HHA as well. I just want to see what goes on there. So that just calls a bunch of write data to file. That part seems to be fine. It's really the HHT that's the problem. So I'm going to put an if in here. Might do this as well. So this way I'll say, look, when we actually produce the final version of this thing, I'm going to go ahead and look and see if the changes need to be written back, then I will do that. If not, I'll say so. When we go to replace a file, if it replaces the file, I'll say we're done. Otherwise, I'll say that it failed. That will just give me slightly more information, so I make sure that I'm debugging the correct case and not actually looking at pieces of code that have nothing to do with the error, right? So I'm going to go back to the HHT here and once again overwrite it so that we get back to the known bad case that seems to be failing a lot. So it should be easier to debug, hopefully. I'm going to refresh this, or try to. There we go. I wonder if meld is just bad. That could be as well. Let's find out. That would be depressing. I'm going to assume it's us, but you never do know. All right, so we rebuilt. And now I'm going to run. And I'm going to go in here and just... Well, you know what? Let me save first. No changes. So that's... Oh, right, because there's two HHTs. So let me actually be more specific. Might as well. When we say that there was no changes in the import, I'm going to go ahead and actually say who, right? So in here, we'll do a printf of whatever what was the file name? So looking for that. Don't actually know what it was. So in here, when we've got the HHTs, so I guess we don't really store that though. Well, we do kind of know in the file info though. So the platform file info itself would actually tell us that piece of information, I think, because base name's there. So we could do that. That seems reasonable. So I could just say, yeah, when you update this here, file info base name, we'll say what was supposed to happen there. Right? So maybe we play with the color stuff because why not? And there we go. All right, let's see what's up. Oops. Try that again. Let's see what we're getting from our readout there and whether or not it makes sense. So it did not like something in this stream. The %s, perhaps? I'm not sure. It's trying to take the length of this string. But that should be fine because we're just using base name. Which should always be valid, right? And that shouldn't be anything weird. Like there it is. So I'm not sure what would be going wrong. So taking a look here at looking at the size of the string. The string that it's getting is not valid, right? Looking at outf here, we've got a couple different things. Let's look at the format specifier. Well, of course it is. All right. So it is a valid string that's on there. But it looks like when it gets it, it ain't valid. I'm going to go ahead and go to debug mode and see if I can get something a little bit more specific there, but it's kind of a little bit weird that it's having trouble parsing base name. I know the base name's accurate because we just looked at it. It is null terminated, as far as I can tell, so that seems fine too. And it should be valid for the entire life of this function. There's nothing weird happening there that I can think of. So I'm not sure what the problem is there. It should be totally fine to read that. And yeah. I don't quite see it. Let's take a look. At least it's reliable and not transient. If we look back here now, we can kind of see what did we end up getting. Just total garbage out of the string there, which is a little bit weird. Am I just doing something really stupid that I'm missing? If I pop out one layer, you can see the format string, %s no changes, and the arg list seems right. I don't get it. Right, that seems correct. Is there some sort of... Let's just step through it. I don't have a better idea at the moment. It's probably just something stupid that I've, it's just a slow morning, I guess. So if I come through here and I look at what it's actually going to go on in outf, right? Here we are. We passed the file name and line number. We got the destination stream. There's our format. And then we're going to look at the arg list here. Well, actually, no. So that's wrong. What are we doing here? Wow, that's really bad. So the one that takes the arg list is getting called instead of the one... So is a VA list a char star pointer or something? Did you see what just happened there? I don't know if you caught that, but what just happened was it preferred to call this when the final parameter was a char star. Like, that's what just happened. Right? So a VA list in this case is apparently the same as a char star? Is that really true? Can we get some validation on that, please? Where's our test project? We don't have our test project. Let's see. I know we made one. It was called like search or test or something, right? Like we had one here. I just don't remember where it went. Nope. Where is that? We had one that we made. It was like, you know, just a stupid MISC project temp thing. Yeah, I don't know where it went. I wanted to do a search on that file. You know what I can do? Let me just find standard arg and see where it is, because I think it should be able to know that. But yeah, I'm curious to know what that actually is. So that's not interesting. Oh my god. That is really, really dangerous. And not what you should be doing. That should be a struct, guys. Like, seriously? Alright. Now we know. Wow. Well, that was an interesting bug. Not what I was expecting to find, certainly. So let's take a look here and make sure that that was the only problem that we were having there. Where is outf defined? It is right here. So I need to make sure that you can't ever call those by accident with overloading. Now we know. Let's try that again. Lovely. So now we can at least see what we think we're writing out. So we say no changes in the case when there is no changes. And we should also now say definitively if we try to save the thing and there are changes, you know, what those changes are. So let's go ahead and do that. There's save changes. Let me go and ahead and pick one. We'll, you know, kind of move this around. And then I'll hit save changes. It'll say base game replaced. So it thinks it wrote it out. And hey, this time it did. If I hit save again, no changes, so nothing got changed on disk. So unfortunately now we're at a point where I don't know if things are actually getting changed. Let's try again. So here we'll adjust this thing around like that or something. And then I'll hit save. It thinks it replaced it. All right, so now it seems to be working, which is troublesome. I guess we'll leave it there for today, and we'll pick it up next weekend because we're out of time. But again, it's a little bit weird, and I'm not really sure exactly what's going on there. So I'm not psyched about that. Yeah, I don't really know what we're looking at. So we'll have to be a little bit more specific going forward. But that's okay. We could do that next weekend. That's fine. Let's go to any Q&As we have there. That was a weird bug at the end there. Yeah, okay, VA list. I wouldn't have done that way, but okay. Team R&B, and this is why I don't use overloading functions. Yeah, you know, you're not wrong. Wouldn't it be nice to move the old file to a file name .back in the atomic file replace? Yeah, it might be. The problem is, what do you do with the other file name .back that's there? Delete that, I guess. Um, I don't know. How awesome would it be if WinDebug Preview had trace diffs? Do you mean if you run a program 2 times and then it tells you what the IP difference was between the two or something? What's a trace diff in your world? Like, what do you mean? Frosty Ninja. Read this in Game Engine Architecture by Naughty Dog's guy I can't remember the name of. Maybe you mean Jason Gregory? But they use C++ user-defined literals to do compile time hashes on strings. At Naughty Dog, we permit runtime hashing of strings, but we also use C++11's user-defined literals feature to transform the syntax any string underscore SID directly into a hashed integer value at compile time. That seems good. I mean, I guess you have a problem, which is your integers could collide. If they literally mean integers. So, just to put that in perspective, so if you mean 32-bit integer, that's probably a bad idea. If you mean 64-bit integer, that's probably not too bad. If you mean 128-bit integer, then yeah, you're all good. 32-bit integers will start colliding once you have, somewhere around 65,000 strings. Even if your hash function's perfect, right? Like, even if it's exactly what it should be. And if it's 64-bit, it'll start colliding around 4 billion strings. And even in a place like Naughty Dog, getting to 4 billion strings seems pretty unlikely, right? So it's probably okay at 64 bits. At 128 bits of hash, if the hash is actually a high-quality hash, then forget it, right? You're fine. You will never, ever, no matter how long you develop or what you do, will you ever be able to collide that unless you hit pure cosmic unfortunate chance. And if you're having that kind of bad luck, your string hash is probably the least of your worries. So yeah, a 64-bit hash of the string seems reasonable, right? Yeah, I would think that would be fine. You can also probably provide some error checking if you wanted to, maybe to prove you didn't collide. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? What happens when require token fails? Yeah, it's just an empty string with a none as the type. So you never really have to check the result because everything should just not work. Like if you try to open a file, it won't work because there's no file name. If you try to match it against something, it won't match because there's nothing there, right? So you should be able to just use it directly as you go. Off topic, just an idea. In 4Coder, you could do the block orientation after exiting the insert mode instead of live. That has nothing to do with it. The reason that it's jumpy is because of virtual whitespace is on, which means that it's always reflowed. There is no such thing as not re-indenting the block. I ended up turning virtual whitespace off. I just don't. I tried using it. I try using it periodically, and it's never quite ready yet. And so the version I integrate in probably next weekend, if we switch over, it doesn't have virtual whitespace on at all because it's just not ready. It's still not ready. I keep trying, and it still keeps not really being ready. So I think it's one of those features that's going to require a concerted effort to get ready. And maybe Alan and I will have to do like a 4Coder whitespace jam at some point to finally get it ready. But it will be going away entirely when I re-update. What are your thoughts on persistent structures like used in Clojure? I don't think I know what Clojure has in terms of that. Like, what can you describe the feature? And I could try to just say what I would think of it, because I'm not familiar with that. Off topic, this probably isn't relevant to you working in a small solo company, but as you get older, any thoughts on aging as a programmer in a large company? It seems many become managers, but irrespective of large organizations, teams, anything you find noteworthy, interesting about your day-to-day as you get older? Not particularly much, other than the fact that I think it's not a very good time at the moment to be an older programmer. Not because not age is really not it. It's the amount of time you've been programming. It's not a very good time to have been programming for 20 or 30 years. And the reason for that is because the like quality of programming is at like an all-time low, and so it's just depressing, right? Like, it's really depressing to go. Like if you compare what it felt like to program when I was 7 and 8 years old or whatever, right? Back when I was little, there were so many really good programmers doing so many really impressive things with what they had. It was a pretty great world, and I just remember how impressive it would be to use, like, when I got an Amiga 500 or something, and how crazy that operating system was. It's nuts that they are able to get so much out of so little. And then looking at today, it's the exact opposite. Like, everywhere I look, it's just complete garbage. It's like extremely powerful hardware that barely is able to do anything at all because the programming is so bad. And so that's really annoying, because it's you don't tend to excel. At least I don't feel like it's easier. It's hard for programmers to excel in an environment where literally like anything they do is good enough. And that's kind of where we're at now. Like, no code that I can ever write in Handmade Hero could be bad enough that it isn't significantly better than the stuff that I have to use when I like open up Gmail, right? Like, there's no way we will ever write anything on the stream that's that bad. And that creates like a really bad precedent and environment, because it really brings everyone's standards down. Like, I'm not pushed to be better every day like I should be, and neither is anybody else, because the stuff that you are used to is so incredibly awful that there is almost no way you can be any worse. Another way to say it would be, the worst programming that you can do is the average programming that you are using. Like we're at the bottom, right? And that's really bad. And I feel like that's the hardest thing about having programmed for a long time, because if you started programming today, you wouldn't know that, right? You wouldn't know how bad things have gotten because you didn't go through any time period where things were at least somewhat better. And it's not to say that software was somehow awesome back in the day. It wasn't. But the amount that people were able to do with what they had was just not even. I mean, it's not even comparable to what you see. You know, what you see today is just terrible. Let's see. I asked in the pre-stream yesterday about aspects of programming you didn't enjoy, and you mentioned no spec or under spec problem domains often being annoying. I was thinking that may well be a young man's game, at least doing it multiple projects in a row. No, I've always disliked it. It's not really an age thing. The reason that I kind of think it's that way for me is I like to accomplish new things when I'm programming. That's like really why I'm doing it. I don't really do it for other reasons than that usually. And so working with underspec stuff just takes it longer to make the new thing, whatever you're trying to do. It's just a waste of my time. If it had been spec'd properly, it wouldn't have wasted my time, right? So sometimes I'm okay with it and don't mind as much, but most of the time I just find it annoying because it's just wasting my time. It's the same reason, like when I was younger, I didn't like it either, and I didn't get into things like security research and stuff for that reason. Like I don't care about investigating other people's binaries or something, right? Like I just don't want to spend the time because I like making new things, and I would much rather just have stuff be spec'd properly. So if I have to use it, I can just know what it does by reading a short thing that it says what it does and know that that is correct. That's way better, right? And so underspec stuff is just wasting my time, and it's not, it's not really an age thing for me. For other people, it might be if you liked it when you were younger. I could absolutely see you getting tired as you get older because you just don't care anymore or something, or you're tired of dealing with it. For me, it wasn't that. I never really liked it. It's never really been something that I like. I always find it kind of annoying. But all right, so here's an explanation of the closure things. The structures are like lists in Lisp, where old versions are kept around because new ones reference the old with subparts containing the new data appended on. So, like, it keeps effectively versions of your structures? Again, I'm not really sure I understand what the feature is per se. It's building up diffs. Yeah. I mean, so I guess I'd have to actually use it to see what I thought of it. But in principle, I like things like that. Might be a way to say it. Ripon Waffle said, "Hey Casey, I just started working on a super open source project in C++, and one thing I'm noticing is that it's so hard to find the code that actually does the thing I'm looking for. Can I expect this with modern C++ because it blows? Literally all I'm trying to do is add a menu option, but my exploration is so far looking at 8 different files, none of which actually contain the thing that I want, which is, from what I understand, literally just adding a Boolean flag in the metadata." Yeah, I mean, this is why I don't use that programming style, and I would have thought it should have been obvious to any programmer worth their salt that it's bad, right? And the reason for that is that the further away your code is from a literal reading of what it is doing at first blush, the worse it is. End of story, for many reasons. 1, other people will have a hard time reading it. 2, you will have a hard time reading it after you've forgotten what it does. 3, if it is not clearly showing the steps it does in the order it does them in a way that's easy to read, chances are it's generating a ton of extra CPU code because the compiler is not smart enough to magically determine you were only doing something simple there. 4, it's extremely hard to debug because when you actually step through this, you're going to be jumping all over the place and it's going to be very hard to follow what was actually happening in the code. 5, it's very hard to maintain because any changes in all of that random code that's all being pulled in and crazily being munged on to do this simple operation could all have bugs in it. And it could all get changed at some point out from under you accidentally. You end up in a left pad situation, right? On and on and on and on. It's terrible. It's just a very bad way to program objectively, I think. There's no real subjectives to it. It doesn't work. It makes things slower to compile, slower to debug, slower to write, and harder to maintain. There's no upsides to it at all that I've ever seen. So yeah, it's horrible. Don't do it. Don't go down that road. It's bad. It is just not good code. By any metric you want to apply that actually measures something. Yeah, Ginger Bill, I'm looking at the comment you're talking about, LLVM CodeGen. You know, I took a look at that too at one point, and it was just like, I don't know what ends up happening because it seems like it shouldn't be that hard to write something that's like, here's a description of what I need the CPU to do. Please generate the code that does it, you know? And yet, when you look at something like LLVM, it's just an absolute train wreck on the inside, right? Like, you just are like, all right, forget it. By the time I even can do a small amount of things with this, I could have written my own code gen, right? And that really shouldn't be the case. And so I think, again, I think that's probably just another situation of just C++ nightmare, because the LLVM code base is all C++ out the, you know, it's just ridiculous. About splitting the code into microscopic files, my coworkers love it because it makes the code quote-unquote easier to read for them. Okay. It seems like they get lost if a file has more than 200 lines. Yeah, I don't know. Probably because they don't have something that can jump quickly to functions, maybe? I don't know. Will moving away from modal and for-coder affect your risks, or have you found that it won't? Sorry, I think maybe the phrase modal is tripping up there. It's still modal from the perspective of the person using the tool to switch around what the hotkeys are doing. The difference is that there's no entering or exiting of operations, right? So meaning I still do this, right? I still have this in there, but what I don't have is like when you hit, like let's say this for list locations for foo, right? This is a modal thing now that if I was to do something else, like for example, switch to query replace or something, like query replace is this modal thing, right? Here's the thing we're replacing and here's what we're replacing it with, and now it's done, right? That's totally modal. It's gone. I can't like I can't just apply it anytime I want or do, right? So what I mean by getting rid of that modality is it's just all of those things are now just part of the edit at any time. So like search and replace isn't like a mode I go into to do search and replace. It's just part of the operations that are available at all times. Does that make sense? So the hotkey mode is still something you control to, again, be easier on the wrists. So you don't have to use the control key. That's separate. The other day I heard someone make the claim that programming without syntax highlighting is more error prone. What would you say? I guess I would say prove it. It could be right. It could be wrong. I don't really do it for errors or not. I do it because it's just more pleasant to have something a little more colorful than just the straight monochrome, right? So I do it more for visual pleasantness. I don't consider it to be a particularly important feature for quality. It's to make the graphic design not too boring, right? So. Yeah, and I guess on the error prone front, let me say one more thing on the error prone front. So I could actually believe a claim that not using syntax highlighting led to more errors if the syntax highlighting highlighted different stuff than it's currently highlighting, right? So like the normal syntax highlighting like this, I'm not so sure. Some of the stuff I added to 4Coder recently, I could easily see it leading to less errors. For example, one of the things I added to 4Coder that's super baller is it auto annotates your pound ifs. So for example, like if you type so if you type something like this, right, it's like who the heck knows what each of these blocks are, right? Like what's this and that? Like what is each of those? I have no idea, right? And you have to start following it through. And so one thing that you'll see people do fairly frequently is they'll be like, oh, all right, like this part here is the end if for foo or whatever, right? But those can easily be wrong, like you can, because it's just a comment. And so what I did in the new version is it can annotate all your scopes for you. So it can just tell you like, hey, this block is the block that corresponds to this expression. Or this end if is the one that closes this pound if, right? And it puts it right in line there for you to see. So a bunch of stuff like that could actually prevent errors. Because you'd be like, oh, whoops, I must have an unbalanced thing here that made it end up being a block I didn't expect. So there's some of that would be good, right? So I think that's, I think that's good. Trying to think if there's anything else. But yeah, so I guess what I'd say is I've put some new features into 4Coder that I think will prevent errors. They aren't the kinds that people are normally talking about with syntax highlighting, and they certainly weren't the things that you heard said because no other editor has any of this stuff that I know of. So we'll see. But like another example would be I have a thing in 4Coder now too that shows you things like when you put in a character or a hex thing, it'll tell you like what that color is or what the character's integer value would be. Again, those are things that could easily be preventing errors because maybe you thought you knew what \n was, but it's actually slightly different. and just having it show you there, be like, oh wait, right, it's not that. Just stuff like that, you know. Another syntax highlighting thing that would prevent bugs in 4Coder that I added is it will auto color decimal and hexadecimal numbers so you can see how large they are. So for example, if you it'll block out every 4. So if you thought you put 6 hexadecimals in, but you only put 5, or you thought you put 12, but you only put 11, you would know because you can see the demarcations very clearly. So I've put in a bunch of stuff now for syntax highlighting, as you'll see when we actually update it, that I could believe all of those could find bugs. But the normal syntax highlighting stuff is just like, is this a function? Is it a string constant? I have a hard time believing that's going to help you find bugs much. I mean, there's just not a lot there. So I do think we've added a bunch of stuff to 4Coder that'll be in the new version that does have the potential to really improve your coding, not just for decoration. But a lot of the syntax highlighting stuff that we currently do, and that's in most other editors, not really the kind of thing that I would say is gonna like help you find errors particularly likely. I really couldn't say. Can't think of a reason why it would. I would have to hear some arguments as to what sorts of errors people thought it was preventing. You know? Like, what kind of a bug do you think it's going to prevent? And maybe that then we could have a more constructive inquiry into it, because I can't even really think about what bugs someone would argue it could prevent. Yeah. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. All right, thank you everyone for joining me for the episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game at handmadehero.org. It comes with all the source code so that you can build it at home and play around with it. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with more streaming. I'm not 100% sure we actually debugged the thing today. By the time we ran out of time, it was apparently working, but I'm not confident. We haven't really done the testing that I would like to do in order to determine that it's actually correct now. Because it's kind of a subtle piece of code, and we did a little bit more than we would normally do in there, and so it seemed a little iffy. So we'll check it out. Next weekend we'll put it through its paces and make sure that there's nothing weird going on there. And try to clean up some of that stuff, and then hopefully we can finally say, all right, now we're good to go, and we can mark up all our art assets, and I'm not going to be nervous about it losing our work or anything like that. That's about it. Until next time, have fun programming, everyone, and I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy.